Good morning, everyone. This is our Adult Education Hour. I'm very pleased to introduce the Dr. Reverend Tony Tian-Ren Lin, who will speak on the sacrifice in the beloved community today. Dr. Tian-Ren Lin is the Program Director for the Leadership Development Initiative at Trinity Church Wall Street. He is a cultural sociologist whose scholarship focuses on the intersection of religion, immigration, race, and ethnicity, and is the author of Prosperity Gospel, Latinos, and the American Dream. Also, Dr. Tian-Ren Lin is a Presbyterian minister, so we're very pleased to have him here today and look forward to what he has to say.
Thank you, Paul. And again, I want to thank Rachel. I know she's busy with another event, and all those who made this possible. And I hope I wish you a happy early Thanksgiving. I hope all of us can have a normal Thanksgiving this year. I was talking to the kids who were over dinner, and none of us, my wife, myself included, could remember what we did last year for Thanksgiving. We sat around thinking, and none of us had any clue what we did. We had to have done something, but we have no idea. And same for Christmas. I don't know what we did for Christmas. I think we did that last Thanksgiving and Christmas when New York had a spike in COVID cases, so there was extra lockdown measures, but we couldn't remember at all. It was a lost year last year. So hopefully not this year. Hopefully this year it won't be a lost year for us. So coming back to the topic of the beloved community, like I said last time, this is the term comes from the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. When he spoke about the beloved community, he tried to offer an image of a community where there was justice and equality and no hunger, no poverty, no hatred, no violence. And it was something he believed in. He believed in this vision of the beloved community, so much so he was willing to die for it. And so the last time I was with you, I was blessed to be with you, I shared on the importance of friendship. Right, friends and real individual communities you can call friends are necessary to have this beloved community. King himself had not just a smaller, tight-knit group of friends, but an expanding network of friends. And so his idea of the beloved community came very much from the Bible, from his conviction as a Christian, but also from his life with the many friends that he had. And he would say through many of his writings, and eventually his late wife, Cleta Scott King, and many of his friends who've written, they would say that all the work they were able to do would not have been possible without those networks, right? Those friends. And so today I'm talking about sacrifice, because one, I don't think the beloved community can be achieved without real, genuine friendships. And now I want to propose that the beloved community is impossible without the idea and the willingness to sacrifice by those who want to be part of this beloved community. And so if you have friends, if you have close friends and you live life with these close friends, the idea of sacrifice is already built into those friendships, but we might not always think of it as sacrifice. Most of those who are married understand this, right? Marriage it's about sacrifice. Not everybody likes to use that word, especially today, but it is about sacrificing part of us to even if what we gain is, I think, right? It's, I'm married, so I think it's worth the sacrifice for what we can gain, but it's still a sacrifice, right? It's still an intentional giving up of something. And so my hope today is to start conversations. As a pastor, I have a very realistic understanding of what the impact of a sermon or a Sunday school class. But my hope is only to start conversations, to help you and either with your network of friends or with your church to start thinking more deeply about the idea of sacrifice in relation to the beloved community. And so going back to the passage I mentioned last week, the idea for this two-part series on friendship and sacrifice came from Jesus. As he said in John 15:13, he says, "No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friend." Right? Jesus put sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice, with friendship. And in his life, in his the whole purpose of the incarnation was that, one, he could call us friends, right? He does no longer call us servants, he calls us friends, and that he sacrificed himself for our salvation. So in thinking of sacrifice, right, where does sacrifice stand in our society today? Where does the idea of sacrifice stand today? And this is something I'm curious to hear from your community and your daily lives, how where do you place the idea of sacrifice, and how often do you think about it or come across this idea of sacrifice? We know that in entertainment, in popular entertainment, the idea of sacrifice is very attractive and very marketable. The best movies, right, the top 10 highest grossing movies of in recent time, I wouldn't say of all times, but in recent times have all leaned very heavily on the idea of sacrifice, right? Sacrificing for the common good, right? Avatar, which is the largest, best, most profitable movie so far in history, has the idea of sacrifice. The conclusion of the first phase of the Marvel's Avengers movie, right? And there's a bit of sacrifice in every movie, but at the final one, he has a very, very clear act of sacrifice. Titanic, Star Wars, Harry Potter, The Lion King. You go down the list, and all of them have somebody sacrifice. Even Toy Story, the latest Toy Story, it has this idea of sacrificing for something larger than themselves. But in real life, right? Where is this? And I think we're attracted to these movies, and there are a bunch of books too, right? Some of the New York Times best-selling novels, fictions, is about sacrifice. Some of the nonfiction is about the sacrifices of the past. I think our obsession with continuous obsession with stories of war, and especially World War II stories, right? It's about pulling out this idea of sacrifice, people who are willing to die for something larger. And so I'm curious to hear from those of you either online or in the classroom. Do you think about this? Is this something that's relevant in your daily life beyond the novels and the fiction that I mentioned?
One of the things I was thinking of as you were talking is sort of the line between giving and sharing and then sacrifice. Somehow, as though sacrifice is a deeper act. It's beyond the first two. But I'm curious your thoughts on sort of where that line is and what would distinguish the first two categories from the latter, more meaningful sacrificial. Okay, what's the difference between a giving act and a sacrificial act?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so biblically we have Jesus tells us that very clearly just giving is not sacrificial, right? Because there are the rich people who throw the coins and make a lot of noise, and then the widow comes and drops everything she has, and Jesus says she gave sacrificially. The rest of them, they gave, but it's different. And I think I would put the line at losing something, right? So for me personally, we have the habit tradition of tithing, right? So I've always tithed, but I wouldn't consider that a sacrifice, because I've never not had to do something because I was tithing, right? I've never had to not go out to eat, not take a vacation, right? We can sit here and think of all the other things I could have done if I had kept, the 10% of my income, but that it's not something that I miss, right? Additional giving, when we sit down and say, as a family, because I can't make these decisions on my own, and we say let's not do this year, and try to help support X, Y, and Z, right? During the pandemic, when so many people were suffering, when we say, let's not do, let's eat out less, let's not do this, and try to give and some extra money to help people going through hard time. I think that's when I have to say no to something and give out something that I usually do, I consider that more sacrificial. Even though, again, putting this into context, right? Yeah, there's a line between sacrifice and suffering, right? I'm not suffering. I'm not, I have no martyr complex, right? So I give sacrificially, but I wouldn't put myself on the point of having to, saying that I suffer in any way, or no one in my family would say that we're suffering because of our sacrifice.
When you said that, one of the things that came to mind when it's talking about laying down or talking about relationships is that I have to be willing to sacrifice and give up my entitlement, that I'm entitled in a relationship to certain things. And if I do and say I'm entitled, that's a barrier versus being willing to give that up for the benefit of the relationship, small or larger. Don't know if that resonates at all with kind of where you're going with this.
Oh, yeah. And the key here is that we all grow up knowing that and seeing that. If you grew up in a family, you've seen it, but we don't always name it as sacrifice, right? And I think that's we lose something when we shy away from that language of sacrifice, and we raise our children without that language, that vocabulary in their world. Any others or somebody else? But I think so. Yeah, I think there's an attraction in popular culture and with the idea of sacrifice, because there's something pure about it. And as human beings, we like that. We long for something, the pureness of that there still are people, or there were people who are not motivated by utilitarian ends, right? They're not out just to get something. That they're the love, the willingness to give of oneself. That there's something pure in there, and that's what I said during about friendships, right? On the class on friendship, that a true friendship is one where you just want to be around each other. There's no agenda. You don't go see your friend because you need something. If you then that's that it's you go there for you hang out with your friends for the joy of it, for just to be with them. Now, in talking about sacrifices, there's different extremes of it. There are certain groups of people who are obsessed with sacrifice. There's the martyr complex that some people have, who are always obsessed with it. There's a very well-known pastor in your neighborhood who wrote books about Christians having to sacrifice and martyrdom, and it's all about dying for the glory of God. And but that's not what I'm thinking, right? That's not what the beloved community really needs. I think there's certain biblical principles about about that concept of sacrificing. Clearly, Jesus said we have to be willing to lay our lives, for our friends. But it's one thing for somebody, for a white man in Minnesota to say that, right? That we have to be willing to die for our faith, and it's glorious to sacrifice, to make the ultimate sacrifice. But it's very different when you have to say it in a place where you can actually be, you can actually happen, right? To say that in Minneapolis, it's very different than somebody saying that in Pakistan or Sri Lanka or North Korea, right? In places where we actually could, right? You actually could be killed for your faith, and there are still many parts in the world where it's dangerous to be religious. Period. Right? The Pew Forum had a survey that came out a few years ago that the government restrictions against religions is at an all-time high, and for many of those is Christians. Right? The government restrictions against Christians and different versions of Christians is increasing now more than over 10 years ago. I remember when I was in Virginia, I pastored a country church in Virginia, very rural place, and I remember meeting a guy who told me that he was willing to die for the King James Version, because the King James Version of the Bible said that America was the greatest nation in the world, right? He said it in the Hebrew, and he studied the Hebrew, and only King James translated it accurately. He was very serious, and he was also very aggressive as he was trying to convert me to the King James Version. And so I was thinking, your very aggressive attitude doesn't lead me to think that you are willing to lay down and die for anything. But also, I thought, you live in Virginia, in Louisa, Virginia. Who's going to kill you for the King James Version? Even in parts where Christians are persecuted, they don't get killed for the version of the Bible they use, right? They don't get killed for anything related to the Bible. They get killed because of the way they live their lives, because of what they do or refuse to do. And so that type of extreme mythical martyr complex is not really what this is about. This is about the idea of sacrifice in daily life as Christians, and trying to think about how we can incorporate that in a Christian way that enhances the common good for all, which is the goal of the beloved community, right? To work for the thriving and flourishing of all people, of everybody in that community, not just a select group of people. And for that type of sacrifice, I want to go to the most famous book ever globally that talks about sacrifice. Shel Silverstein's The Giving Tree. The Giving Tree. World famous. I'm sure all of you have read it to your kids and grandkids. I read it as a little kid, and I read it in Spanish when I was in Argentina, and I read it here to my kid. We have a whole book of Silverstein's books. And so the Giving Tree, originally published in 1964. And of course, I'm sure most of you know, it's about a tree and a little boy. They play, they love each other. And then the boy grows up and he needs money. He gets the apples from the tree. He needs a house. He gets the branches. And he grows older. He wants a boat, so he cuts the trunk. And then at the end of it, he was just a stump. And then the old man said, I'm too old for anything else. All I need is a stump. So he sits on the stump. And it's the idea of the book, the tree that gave everything for the love of this boy, right? The Giving Tree. He gave everything. 1964, that came out, and globally read and loved by children for many generations. Then fast forward to 2019. In 2019, playwright Soper Payne he wrote a book called The Tree Who Sets Healthy Boundaries, right? And he published it. You can Google this, the Tree Who Sets Healthy Boundaries. And he published it. It's an anathema to authors, right? It's horrible, but he printed it so that you can print out at home what he wrote with, similar illustration, and you can cut it out and tape it over the original book. And in his version, in The Tree Who Sets Healthy Boundaries, the tree gives a boy the apples, but when the boy comes back for a house, for the branches, the tree says, wait, that's enough, boy. Yeah, I gave you the apple, they're going to grow up, that's fine. But now you're coming here to ask for my branches, you're asking me to hurt myself. You got to get your life together, okay? I'm a tree over here, I got squirrels living in my holes, and you can't just think of yourself. You can't be so selfish. And in this version, in the 2019 version, the boy gets his act together, and the boy and the tree start an apple pie making business, and they live happily ever after, right? So, and they both profit. The tree makes the apples, and the boy has a bakery selling apple pies, and everybody's happy. And I thought, how strange and how sad that our culture has changed to this point, and how and I thought, as a pastor, as a Christian, how are Christians to respond to this? Because clearly I agree that there are abusive relationships, and there are times when we need to separate ourselves from abusive relationships. But in the original book, in Shel Silverstein's version of The Giving Tree, at the end of every act of sacrifice, right? Every act of sacrifice was the tree initiating, right? So the boy never asked for anything. The tree gives it up. And then at the end of each part, it says, and the tree was happy, right? The sacrificial giving made the tree happy. In this 2019 version, there was no such ending. And it was about preserving the tree and essentially the status quo in a certain way that gives up, right? That does away with the voluntary willingness of the tree to give, right? Of sacrifice. And I personally thought that was sad, but it also shows the contradiction of the time that we live in right now, that where on one hand you have this best-selling movie, very popular and profitable popular culture products that highlight sacrifice, but in individuals' lives we're told to set healthy boundaries that does away with the idea of sacrifice. And I'm curious to see if you see that in your lives, in ideas and actions that you would have traditionally thought as a good thing, as a good sacrificial thing to do, but now it's viewed negatively, right? It's viewed as something that's unhealthy and shouldn't be done. And I don't think there's a clear line. I think every person has to decide that line for themselves. But I see that the larger concept of that, right, being pushed down through our culture, and I'm just curious if any of you see that in your world. Do any of the ideas that used to be sacrifice and used to be valued as sacrifice have any of those being curbed, and people have been told not to do that?
Tony, I'd like to comment a bit on that in terms of the dialectic that you lay out, and it's really it undergirds kind of a lot of Jesus's preaching, The first will be last, the last will be first. So sacrifice is in our culture doesn't necessarily feel good. And as you point out, and certainly as a therapist myself, that's what we frequently tell our patients or clients is you need to set healthy balance. And oftentimes that's this knee-jerk response. And culturally, that's really is played out. Yet on the other hand, there is a drive or a pull towards sacrifice. And I think it's this dialectic, this contradiction that needs to be held and accepted, but it just doesn't get played out.
Yeah, I remember reading on a magazine, so one of these popular people magazine or something like that. There was an article that said how to be happy, and number one was acts of altruism. And I thought, well, is it really altruistic if your goal is what you get out of it, not not the altruistic act, right?
So somehow you have to maintain an expectation of, it's not a reciprocal, it's not a transactional experience. It's simply being driven to perform or behave in a way that we're called to behave in. As Christians.
No, and I'm glad, Paul. I'm glad you're weighing in because this is most critical and most dangerous in trauma. Because a lot of people have been traumatized because they couldn't draw healthy boundaries. They've been abused, right? A lot of us, myself included, have been in positions where we thought we were sacrificing, but it was really just a very very unhealthy, toxic work environment, right? Where there was a lot of abuse and there should have been lines drawn. It was not sacrifice, right? But I think that's why reintroducing and understanding what sacrifice actually is help us on that side draw the lines to say, they're just taking from me. They're just coming here being abusive. This is not what the gospel talks about as sacrifice, right? This is not what we should be engaged in. Yes.
I was glad that Paul brought up the transactional nature of a lot of what people see as sacrifice today. I think one of the sad elements, and we've talked about this, and I think actually, Tony, you even mentioned this in the last presentation here, was that we're the most connected society, culture in world history, and we're also the loneliest, right? Yeah. Which speaks to, I think people would much rather send $5 or $10 to GoFundMe or go like some endeavor that they see online than go to a meeting and sit in a room with people and say, how are we going to solve this problem? And so I think that's kind of the interesting element that people want the in some ways the cleanliness of a transactional interaction, because sacrifice can be very messy, and people would rather not sort of get involved, I think, in the messiness of life, which is, I think, unfortunate, because life is messy. Yeah. And you lose some of the richness of that when you're not willing to be across the table from somebody who might yell or who might cry or who might need something from you that you may uniquely be able to give.
Yeah. And that's the very act of sacrifice that we sometimes, making time to show up and sit in front of somebody and be willing to sit there and be yelled at, right? So sometimes it could be your mistake or because they just need somebody to yell at. Are you willing to sacrifice your ego and time and everything to sit there and take it and know that you're doing it as an act of love, right? Voluntarily as an act of love, right? Yes.
I was thinking when you mentioned earlier that sacrifice involves having to give up something that counts, and that we don't want to give up necessarily in order to do whatever it is we're doing in the sacrificial effort. And we have 4 kids, my wife and I, and they run in age from 30 to 50. We're close to them and to many of their friends. And it came home to us, both of us, during the pandemic, When we first saw data that said 2 million, estimated 2.5 million, who knows how many women left the workforce. A lot of those women, surely, I mean, the friends that we have, we know this to be true, are very productive in their jobs. They're using their skills, their energies, they're making a difference. But they were coming back essentially to take care of the children and home responsibilities. And it occurred to us, whoa, why is that? Why is that? And it may be that they're then home, like so many other mothers before them, for such a long period of time. It's going to make a difference in terms of what their career looks like over time. Mm-hmm. So these women now, and maybe in their 30s in particular, or millennial moms too, 20s and 30s, that's a lot. And there are other options, you know, more people in the family, especially husbands, could step up. Employers could make a sacrifice, quote unquote, maybe use fewer dollars for profits and put more into daycare. There's a trade-off. Mm-hmm. There's always a trade-off. At the local or national policy level, there's an issue about daycare subsidies and support for our families. And arguably, we would all have to sacrifice a little bit more if we paid more taxes for funded programs that came through public, or even the nonprofits, if we contributed more to nonprofits. So there's a whole array of issues at play here that could speak to what truly for a lot of our younger moms and maybe somewhat older moms was a sacrifice with consequences, and it's continuing. Mm-hmm. And I really have a lot of admiration for those moms, and for single moms in particular, for whom it's even more difficult to continue during the pandemic doing what they're doing. So just an idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and you bring in a very important point in thinking about the idea of sacrifice and what constitutes a sacrifice. I'm thinking about Boston, the new mayor in Boston. In her first week, she signed a decree, a law to make. There were 3 bus lines in Boston that she made totally free, right? And right away, people, they were like, "What? How dare, it's unfair to the people who still have to pay it. It's why should our tax dollars go to this?" And being from Boston, those 3 bus lines go. It's one of them is one of the longest, the ones who goes further out, and they bring in all the workers to Boston. So if you live in Boston and you're not aware of the larger ecosystem that helps Boston run, you think this is unjust, unfair, waste of tax dollar money. But if you live in Boston, you actually know how things work, right? The free buses in those communities for those 3 bus lines, and it was only for 2 years. It wasn't even permanent. I hope it's permanent. But free bus transportation for those communities means more people being able to come and do the service work that keeps Boston going. So the act for people who are not taking those bus lines, they're benefiting from those bus lines, right? So just like you were saying, the women, the 2 million plus women who left the workforce, we're going to pay for that as a community, as a society, right? Because we don't want to sacrifice now to keep them in the workforce, there's going to be some consequences. If you think of the percentage of those women who are in the healthcare industry, right, which had some of the highest burnout rates I know in New York City, there's always been a shortage of nurses, but especially after the pandemic, so what they had to go through, right? And so many of them are these women that you mentioned. And I think
so even if you never go to the hospital, someday somebody will go there, and there will be a shortage of nurses, because we refuse to create a system right now to prevent that shortage from happening. Now, to try to bring this home, I like you to use your imagination for a minute and imagine with me. Let's say that for some unknown reason, we suddenly find ourselves all of you find yourselves living in a Minneapolis where all forms of transportation are no longer useful, right? Cars, bikes, trains, everything is gone. They're all gone. But there are a bunch of wild horses around. And so everywhere you go, you have to walk. But the wild horses are out there. But somebody has to tame those wild horses. And for some reason, in this place, in this community, in this future, hopefully not future, but imagine Minneapolis, only children can tame the horses. Only children. Adults will never tame the horses, but children can be put on those horses. And they will be able to tame them. But if you've seen horses being tamed, it's a very violent act. They'll kick and they'll throw the kids off. Some will get hurt very badly. Some might even die, but a significant number, or hopefully a significant number of them, will be able to tame the horses, and the community will be able to travel further, and Minneapolis will be able to move forward and have a better future, better chance. Who will volunteer their kids? Who wants to send their kids? Would any of you want to send your kids? Knowing that you can just walk, right? You can just raise your family in your little Minneapolis town and grow your little garden in the summer, learn how to can, I don't know, whatever you have to do, and just live your own life. Or you could give up your kids, send your kids to try to tame horses, and the whole community will have a faster form of transportation. Good idea, bad idea, should it be done? Thoughts?
I'm going to weigh in again, Tony, and say, this is not an imagined scenario. It's a factual past. So those of us who are baby boomers, all of our grandparents did exactly that same thing during World War II, where there was a draft and there was tremendous pressure on individuals, families, family systems, and individuals to participate in that and to sacrifice themselves. And in some cultures, Israel, for example, that continues to be the case. There's mandatory national service. And in many European countries, there's also mandatory national service, but that's a no-go in our society now. So again, I don't have any answers, but I'm saying we as a society did that, and tremendous personal sacrifice.
Yeah, and you knew exactly where I was going with this. I for the record, I don't know if I would do it, right? But what was there somebody else who wanted to chime in on this point? No? Yes? Okay, so where I was going with this was a little bit after World War II, although it certainly happened in World War II. But in 1955, after Brown versus Board of Education was passed in this country, the desegregation of the school was supposed to start, but most people don't think of what those parents, the Black parents, the decision that they had to go through. Because in those days, they were very good Black schools, right? They were schools. Most of them were in churches. If you know the movie Hidden Figures, right? The human computers, the Black women who helped NASA win the space war and get NASA to the moon. They were Black women who were educated in Black schools, rural Black schools, and then eventually Black colleges for women. And they ended up being literally that's what they would call them, human computers for NASA. So they were good schools for Black children. But the parents were faced with that choice. Having read the news, knowing what was happening, they were told that people are going to put bombs in these schools. If the kids show up, people are going to shoot them. And these parents had to decide, am I going to send my kids, pull my kids out of the good Black schools where they're going now and send them to this place where the people running those schools already said they would not teach my children. And the people in those communities already said publicly, right, no mask, nothing. They were on the street saying they're going to kill my kids. And they had to say whether they were going to send their kids into those places. And enough parents said yes. Enough parents said yes. I will do that. I will pull my kids, right? Even little kids, Ruby Bridges, just a tiny little kid, was escorted into school by the National Guard and sat there by herself for over a year. They said yes because they believe that they believe in the vision of America, and because of their Christian faith, right? If you read Ruby Bridges' autobiography, she said she was praying for those people because her parents raised her to pray for the people who were threatening her and cussing at her and then spitting at her, because that's what she was raised to do. It was because of sacrifice, right? What was so ingrained in their faith, in their form of Christianity, that they say yes to do this. And we reap the benefit today, right? Our society is better. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was in 1955 or 65 or even 75. There is small, but there is progress because enough parents say yes. Enough parents say yes, I will send my kids into those dangerous places because that's what I'm called to do for the sake of the greater good, for the benefit of those people I will never meet, right? From generations on. Even though Ruby Bridges is only in her 50s, right? She's still around. All of this wasn't that long ago. And so what can we do as individuals, right? Knowing this, in thinking about this idea of sacrifice. And I'd like to throw some ideas out there and then open it up for conversation. I think one of the places we can learn, obviously, it is from racial, ethnic, and immigrant communities. I think something that a certain level of discomfort, being able to live with a certain level of discomfort and cultural discomfort is required for us to be open and willing to sacrifice. As an immigrant, I know that I've always known that whenever we go out to eat with my friends, whenever anybody invites me out to eat, it will probably not be food that I like. It will probably not be food that the cuisine from my background, but I go anyways, right? Because the world, as an immigrant, the world, the institution, the things around me were not built for me. I don't expect it to cater to me, and so having to go along, right, just for the sake of being with my friends and having that community is just part of what we have to do, right? But even beyond that, when I walk into the average supercuts to get a haircut, I don't expect there to be for there to be somebody who knows how to cut Asian hair, right? I expect my hair to be messed up, but hey, this is, I'm not going to sue Supercuts to say, hey, you got to have somebody who can cut my hair. That's what Supercut does. If I voluntarily go in there, I expect there I should expect that what's in there is not, it will not perfectly suit me and cater to me. And I think part of the challenges, especially the racial challenges today, some of what passes as white fragility, right? What some people call white fragility, is the acknowledgement by many white Americans that that maybe for the first time in a long time or ever in this country, there are cultural institutions and practices that don't cater to the cultural modes, the norms that they grew up with, that they've always had, right? That now that they could show up to a party and be served something that they've never seen or never heard of, that they can show up to certain institutions and have certain norms and expectations that were never what they expected it to be, right? So show up in places of worship where the worship is more than an hour, Presbyterian, that's, we can't do more than an hour. And there's more movement and such that we're not used to it. And it's that discomfort, right? That's a certain level of discomfort that's raising and making it difficult for us to live together and create that beloved community. So I propose that we intentionally, as a first step, and it's not even sacrificial, but as a first step, I think we should all intentionally put ourselves in places where we are uncomfortable and we're okay being uncomfortable. That we should show up to places where people dress differently than us and they won't say or do the things that we've traditionally consider normal in our community. We should be open to doing things that are radically different but still fitting within the system. In New York, I met this group of people, and they're my contractors now for an apartment that we have. They're based in Brooklyn, where all the hipster new things are, and it was a guy with one company that was training people who either were coming home from prisons or were in situation of housing insecurity. They were homeless individuals, and he was training them to be carpenters and work in construction because that's a very, very profitable, lucrative job here. But he found out that because of certain laws here, because of certain union regulations, people with a criminal history could not get the highest paying job. And so instead of keep training these people, he changed his company into a co-op so that he bypassed the laws of not being able to hire people with certain backgrounds, because now everybody who worked in the company were co-owners. Right? There is a co-op now. Everybody owns it, so none of them are employees, and all of them can share in the profits. And there is profit, right? This is when a lot of people, when they think of co-op, they think socialism, communism, but they still function within a capitalist system. They're still making a profit, right? Believe me, they're my contractors. I'm paying them good money, and their bid was similar to all the other bids we got. It wasn't like it was a lot lower. They work like every other business, but for the owner, right? He had to make a sacrifice because now he had to share in the profit. But he helped. There are all these people, right? They've been around for 10 years. One of them just went to Philly to start another co-op to help people there, right? And it's spreading, and it's a movement that works within the system, but it's very different than the traditional way we've been told to think. So. Yeah, I'd like to hear some of your ideas, some of the little things you think, right? Small steps that you can take to make this idea of sacrifice and this discomfort that we're called to live with a part of our normal lives. And you can speak as individuals or as a community, right? As a, what can you do as a church even to think about that more deeply, to build that right into the life of the church.
Tony, I think your point about being willing to place yourself in circumstances where you're uncomfortable is kind of the first step. And we, as a large historic downtown community, have struggled with that. It's how do we do that? We're in an urban center. How do we be welcoming to those who are experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity, and at the same time struggling with setting appropriate boundaries and being safe, and it necessitates getting out of one's comfort zone and being willing to fail at some points, and that, I think, for a lot of us who don't have the opportunity or don't place ourselves in the opportunity to fail very often is challenging. I know it is for me. I don't like to be viewed as somebody who's not effective or able to kind of accomplish their goals. So I think it's a challenge.
When I think of sacrifice in our culture, I think of sports, and I think of baseball, which is an American sport. And fundamentally, there's no misunderstanding when it comes to a sacrifice fly or a sacrifice bunt. They don't always work. Many times the sacrifice bunt is ineffective, and the player doesn't get the kind of opportunity to hit the ball out of the field. So we tend as a culture to have both a value for the sacrifice bunt that's done well and brings the player in or moves them along. We also appreciate the person who ignores that sign to bunt, hits the ball out of the park, and everybody cheers because they won the game because the person ignored. He didn't sacrifice. It's the Michael Jordan who won't sacrifice. So in sports, we understand sacrifice. Football, baseball, all the sports we have, there are players who sacrifice themselves for a greater good. My question is, as a culture, if we don't believe in the greater good, sacrifice is simply not undertaken. So how do we, and beloved community is a very important, I think, greater good. So I look at sacrifice as a motivational issue. And how do you make your decision to sacrifice? Because not every time you sacrifice, sometimes you're throwing pearls before swine. You're wasting your effort. Now, maybe that's what you're supposed to do anyway. That's the Good Samaritan who just simply does it out of the character of his heart. But that's foreign in our culture to just simply sacrifice all the time. That's not prudent. That's not wise. That doesn't protect you. And yet that seems to be in some ways what Christ was calling us to consider as a mindset. But what is the greater good that we get? Because the community benefits, but we have to understand that concretely. It isn't just, oh, I sacrifice by taking a meal today. How does that help move forward? So I'm looking at the motive for what is the greater good that we need to keep in our mind when we sacrifice, if we choose to do so, because that's going on. That quid pro quo is going on all the time. It's not a transaction for me personally. It might be the benefit the whole community, but I'm still going through that. And I'm still thinking about that. And that is a modern concept.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the idea of sports. When I was thinking about preparing for this class, there was some study that I read that in the last 15 to 20 years, there's been a dramatic rise in individual sports, right? So team sports have been in decline, and baseball in particular, little leagues, right? There's been, I think ESPN had a special about the decline of little leagues. That's why the majority of the best players, we have to import them. Literally, we import these players because the idea of working together and having to depend on somebody to win or lose, it's in decline. But what's rising a lot is triathlons, marathon running, racquetball, tennis, all these things that that you are in total control, these sports, especially in the elite class, right? It's rising dramatically. And then the other part, what you said about the common good, that's ultimately that. Yeah, I hope the idea of friendship and sacrifice will help move along this conversation, because it is a conversation that even in my academic circle in social sciences and even political sciences, the idea of the common good, it no longer there's no longer an agreement of what's good for the common good. And I think it's precisely because somebody has to sacrifice. So and there are a lot of places in society that it is a zero-sum game, because certain institutions were built in this way to benefit one group and disadvantage another. And to bring that to the point of beloved community, somebody has to sacrifice. But I have a friend who studies this, and he said he no longer used the common the common good. He says there are shared goods, and they are things like the highway, public roads, right? Even schools are no longer considered a common good, right? America, it was the beacon of life for public school, right? Public education was supposed to be we wanted to educate everybody so that we would have an educated citizens to advance the nation. And even schools are now more segregated than they were in 1955, believe it or not, right? And not because of laws, but because of the way we choose to live, right? So white neighborhoods, black neighborhoods, so what we consider is good for everybody it's a serious conversation that we need to think through and define, and it's going to be different for every community, right? Obviously in New York City, what's good for the common good is very different than what in Minneapolis and St. Paul is. I work for a church right now, Trinity Church Wall Street, where we're very concerned about the common good, and we have an entire ministry called Neighborhood Support, right, that just focuses on New York City and Lower Manhattan, where our church is, and that's a lot of that is what we're thinking through. We've thought through internally, and as we begin to make some of this work, because we're so interconnected, right? We were always having this conversation that is it part? Are we contributing to the greater good of New York City if we do something in XYZ city? If we support this type of work in somewhere else? A lot of the time, the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is not even in New York City, right? We have a housing and homelessness initiative in our grant making, but we don't give to shelters. We don't fund shelters. People are shocked, but our initiative. Our goal, and shelters are important, but our goal is to end homelessness. And shelters, as important as they are, they don't help to end homelessness, right? So, but yet they do serve a purpose. They're very important. It's just that in our very specific, particular calling in ending homelessness, it doesn't fit in what we give. But that's for us. It might not be true for other places. It's Paul.
Well, thank you, Tony. I'm conscious of the time, and I just wanted to thank you so much for your insightful thoughts on sacrifice in the beloved community, and may we all be inspired to go out and do something about that and engage in our own sacrificial practice as Christians. So again, thank you very much for your presentations. I would like to announce and invite participants in this adult education to come again next Sunday, which is the first Sunday in Advent. Austin Hartke, who is a graduate of Luther Seminary and writes on reading the scripture through a trans perspective, will be speaking on getting curious about gender diversity. Mm-hmm. So again, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Tony.
Thank you. Can we close in prayer real quick? Can I close? I forgot to open in prayer. So let's close in prayer. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for blessing us with this time to share together. Thank you for the privilege to be in fellowship, even through Zoom, with my brothers and sisters in Westminster Presbyterian Church. Lord, may you bless the church, bless the communities, bless us and give us the insight and the sensitivity to follow you, to follow the Holy Spirit as you guide us to foster greater friendships and place ourselves to be ever more willing to sacrifice for your glory, Lord. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.